Alright guys, let's get into this because what is happening around Diddy right now is honestly one of the wildest spirals we've ever seen in modern hip-hop culture, celebrity culture, and online culture. I'm literally exhausted, traveling, barely slept, but even in this state I had to talk about it because every time you think Diddy has reached the peak of outrageous behavior, he somehow finds a new height to climb. And today, the spotlight is right on him for sending 50-cent funeral arrangements, yes, literal funeral flowers, while he's sitting in prison. The absurdity of this moment is almost cinematic. It feels like something you would watch on a Netflix thriller, except it's real, and it's happening in front of millions of people who are now wide awake to the man behind the image. This entire situation is not just a threat, it's a reflection of how unstable Diddy has become and how desperate he is to regain power when he has none left. The fact that he thinks sending funeral flowers to one of the most unshakable, unbothered, and unmovable personalities in the music industry is going to intimidate anybody is beyond ridiculous. It shows he is unraveling mentally and emotionally, and it also shows that the pressure from the recent documentary has cracked something deep inside him. You can almost picture him pacing that prison floor, furious, shouting at people on the phone, trying to still operate with that same big boss energy he had on the outside. But the truth is, he doesn't have any control anymore. He's locked up, limited, surrounded by guards, and relying on a tiny little phone to maintain whatever connections he has left. And the timing of this meltdown is not random. Ever since the PJ documentary dropped, and again, I'll be reviewing part 4 soon, God willing, the online reaction has been explosive. People who once defended Diddy, who used to brush off accusations, who used to ignore the victims, suddenly woke up. They watched those clips, heard those insiders, saw those allegations laid out in detail, and their entire perception shifted overnight. And that shift is what's driving Diddy insane. He's watching the internet, the same place that worshipped him for decades, turn its back on him. That's something he cannot tolerate. Because Diddy has always operated on one currency, power. Power over narrative, power over people, power over perception. The second that slipped out of his hands, he started spiraling. And 50 Cent? Of all people, Diddy really thinks 50 is going to be intimidated by some prison-produced, half-baked threat? This is a man who survived 9 gunshot wounds. A man who built his entire public persona on not being afraid of anything or anyone. This is the man who trolled his enemies so hard that even his enemies eventually gave up. 50 doesn't scare easy. If anything, sending him funeral flowers is the fastest way to make him troll you harder. And we already know 50 is loving this. He has built a career out of weaponizing humor and ridicule. He doesn't back down, he doubles down. Sending him funeral flowers while locked up does nothing but prove how powerless Diddy truly is. It's like watching someone shouting from behind a locked door, pretending they're still in control. And the internet knows it, which is why people are mocking Diddy, dissecting this moment, spreading memes, and openly laughing at how desperate he is. You can almost imagine Diddy sitting there in that cell, raging, begging for solutions, calling his team, demanding someone fix the optics, fix the narrative, fix the internet. But this time, nobody can fix it. You can't intimidate people from inside a prison cell the way you used to when you had security teams, connections, and a whole empire behind you. And the irony is that Diddy brought so much of this downfall on himself by being cheap. That's something a lot of people overlook. If he had paid the people around him properly, if he had compensated victims, if he had settled disputes with fairness instead of arrogance, so many of these lawsuits and leaks wouldn't have surfaced. But he didn't. He treated his people like they were disposable. He expected loyalty without ever giving loyalty. And when everything collapsed, all those people he used and underpaid were the first ones to turn around and sell him out. Those elevator clips? Leaked by his own people. Those behind-the-scenes recordings? Leaked by his own circle. When you don't treat people well, and you rely on intimidation and manipulation to control your world, the second you lose the ability to intimidate or manipulate, everything falls apart. This is why he's screaming at lawyers, throwing tantrums, trying to send cease and desist letters to Netflix from prison like Netflix is some small YouTube channel he can bully. Netflix doesn't care. They already got the footage, the public reaction, the global conversation. The documentary is out, and it's not going away. It's bigger than him now. And that documentary is the core reason for this meltdown. The cultural shift it triggered is massive. For years, people defended Diddy no matter what. They dismissed the victims. They blamed Cassie. They said the women were looking for money. They even went as far as to say Diddy was being targeted unfairly. But when 50, a man, a public figure, someone with cultural impact, stepped in and presented information, suddenly everyone listened. It's sad that society needs a male validation stamp before believing abuse victims, but that's exactly what happened. And that is what's crushing Diddy's ego. He spent decades building his empire on the belief that he was untouchable. Now he's being touched, exposed, dismantled. The wildest part is how unhinged Diddy looks in every leaked prison clip. Screaming at Mark Neal, slamming phones, telling his lawyers to find him a solution the moment they hang up, filing bail applications back to back because he refuses to accept confinement. You can tell he's a nightmare client. He doesn't sleep, so his lawyers don't sleep either. He wants to control the world from inside a cell. But the world moved on. And once that documentary shifted the internet's perception, especially among men who are now outraged at him for reasons ranging from Biggie to Tupac to Cassie to Kim Porter, it was over. The thing about men turning on you is that men online move as a pack. When one big figure speaks up, others follow. And 50 is a massive figure. His voice carries weight. When he says, "This guy is dangerous," the culture listens, and that's exactly what happened. Diddy knows that the men who once admired him now see him as a predator. Men who once wore Sean John now talk about how Biggie was exploited. Men who once danced to Bad Boy for Life now post about how Diddy manipulated, controlled, and unalived careers, maybe even lives. So yes, sending funeral flowers to 50 Cent isn't just a threat. It's a tantrum. It's an emotional outburst from a man who is watching his entire legacy crumble piece by piece. And it's also a reminder that the anger brewing inside Diddy is something he can't hide anymore. Not in statements, not in interviews, not in press releases. No PR team can patch this mess. And on top of everything, the legal world around him is collapsing too. Keefe D's trial getting delayed again is another sign that massive pieces of this puzzle are still coming. More evidence surfaced. So much evidence that the judge delayed the trial until August 2026, just so the defense could look through the pile. That tells you everything. Big cases don't get delayed this far unless the evidence is overwhelming. That connects back to Diddy too, because the stories of Tupac, Biggie, the violence, the power plays, they're all intertwined whether people want to admit it or not. And Diddy knows that. He knows that as long as these cases stay alive, his name stays in the mix. His past doesn't go away. His connections don't disappear. And that scares him. Not because he's afraid of prison time. He already has that, but because he cannot control the narrative anymore. He can't spin it. He can't silence it. He can't buy it out. Everything is falling apart at once. And that's why we're seeing these frantic, emotional, unhinged reactions from him. He feels betrayed by Netflix, betrayed by his friends, betrayed by his employees, betrayed by the world. But nobody betrayed him more than he betrayed himself. His downfall is the result of years of abuse, manipulation, arrogance, and greed. And now, the mask is off. The world sees him clearly. And the more you look at how Diddy is reacting in real time, the more obvious it becomes that this is not just about anger. It's about a man who has spent decades believing he was invincible, suddenly realizing that the world has receipts, witnesses, timelines, and testimonies that he cannot outrun. You see it in every leaked clip from inside the prison, in the way he barks orders, in the way he snaps at anyone who dares to speak without offering him a solution. That frantic, almost panicked tone is not the tone of a powerful mogul. It is the tone of a cornered man. And when a man who's always controlled everything becomes cornered, he lashes out in the most irrational ways imaginable. That's where the threat to 50 Cent comes in. That's where the funeral flowers become symbolic, not of power, but of desperation. Diddy is sitting in a cell thinking that if he can make one big, dramatic gesture, maybe he can scare someone. Maybe he can shock the internet. Maybe he can re-establish even an illusion of dominance. But all he did was expose how badly he's unraveling. Because no powerful man sends funeral flowers from prison. Only a man who has lost control of his empire, his public image, and his mental stability would resort to something so dramatic yet so pathetic. And 50 Cent reacting with amusement? That's the part that drives Diddy the craziest. Because 50 does not fear him. 50 does not respect him. And 50 certainly does not take his threats seriously. Imagine sending someone a death threat, and then watching that person laugh about it online. That destroys whatever intimidation you were trying to create. It flips the power dynamic completely. Diddy wanted fear, but what he got was mockery. And 50 is the last person you want mocking you, because once he starts, he doesn't stop. He knows how to turn a feud into a cultural event. He knows how to make memes that last years. And Diddy knows this too. That's why the frustration is eating him alive. He is sitting in prison watching an enemy he tried to scare turn the entire moment into comedy content. That stings, especially for someone with Diddy's ego. But beyond the pettiness and the threats, the deeper issue is the cultural shift that the documentary triggered. For years, Diddy relied on the illusion that he was still Puff Daddy, the fun, charismatic, dancing mogul who threw the best parties and ran the music industry like a kingdom. He believed that image protected him because people didn't want to believe anything bad about him. They wanted the nostalgia more than the truth. But when the documentary broke everything down piece by piece, testimonies, footage, timelines, it pierced that nostalgia. It made people realize that behind the shiny suits and the bright lights was a manipulative, abusive, controlling man who built his empire on the backs of people he mistreated. And that realization opened a floodgate of anger, especially among men. Because once men feel betrayed by a figure they admired, their reaction is 10 times louder than before. That's why forums, comment sections, and social media threads are filled with men saying things like, Diddy was a snake, or he did Biggie dirty, or this man's whole career was built on exploitation. Once that sentiment spreads, it becomes part of the culture. It becomes permanent. And Diddy feels that shift hard. He can't take the fact that people are finally connecting the dots between the deaths of Tupac, Biggie, Kim Porter, the lawsuits, the abuse allegations, and the behind-the-scenes stories from artists who left his label. It's like puzzle pieces that were scattered for decades finally clicked together. Now people are discussing him in the same breath as powerful abusers who hid behind fame for too long. And that terrifies him more than prison. Prison is physical, but losing cultural admiration is spiritual. It hits a person in their identity. It makes them feel irrelevant, small, forgotten. And someone like Diddy, whose entire life revolves around being seen, being praised, being worshipped, cannot survive that kind of identity collapse without breaking. That's why he keeps issuing these bizarre statements from prison through his spokesperson. Statements accusing Netflix of betrayal. Statements accusing 50 of betrayal. Statements accusing former employees of betrayal. Every statement has the same theme. I've been betrayed. But the irony is painful. He betrayed countless people. He manipulated countless careers. He put countless individuals in unsafe situations. Yet he is acting like he's the victim of some giant conspiracy. It's delusion mixed with narcissism. It's the final stage of a fallen empire. When a king loses his kingdom, he blames everyone except himself. That's exactly what Diddy is doing. And the delays in the Keefe D trial only add more fuel to this spiraling fire. The new evidence that surfaced, so overwhelming that the judge pushed the trial back an entire year, signals something far deeper happening behind the scenes. People talk. Documents resurface. Witnesses reevaluate their silence. Old tapes get digitized. There is no such thing as a secret in the digital age. And Diddy knows that the deeper law enforcement digs into anything related to Tupac or Biggie, the more his name inevitably pops up in the margins. Even if he never faces charges connected to those cases, the cultural memory will attach him to the narrative. He becomes part of the story of one of the biggest tragedies in hip-hop history. And people are already rewriting the narrative online. Diddy as the puppet master, the manipulator, the man who stood to gain from chaos. Whether that's legally true or not, the cultural myth is forming, and myths outlive court rulings. What really makes everything worse for him is that while he's losing the public, he's also losing his inner circle. The people who used to worship him are now the ones selling footage, leaking calls, and exposing his tantrums. When someone becomes rich and powerful, they often surround themselves with yes men, people who stay loyal only because of money. But the minute the money stops flowing or the power crumbles, those yes men disappear or turn on you. And that's exactly what's happening to Diddy right now. Every betrayal he is crying about was caused by his own refusal to treat people with loyalty or respect. He never saw them as humans, he saw them as tools. Tools don't stay loyal when they're mistreated. They get replaced. And right now, he's the one being replaced by narratives, documentaries, evidence, public outrage, and cultural memory. And this is why he's panicking. This is why he's sending threats that make no sense. This is why he's issuing statements that sound like delusional rambling. This is why he's pacing around that cell screaming at lawyers to fix it. Because deep down he knows the truth. You cannot fix a cultural shift. You cannot silence millions of people. You cannot unrelease a documentary. You cannot scare 50 Cent. And you cannot undo decades of damage with one press statement. The world finally sees him, and that visibility is his downfall. Meanwhile, 50 continues to move like nothing Diddy does can touch him. He's producing shows, posting memes, promoting projects, laughing, engaging with fans, doubling down on the documentary series. And every time 50 posts something, it sends Diddy deeper into madness. Because Diddy hates losing control more than he hates prison. Watching someone take your narrative, flip it, and make it entertaining for millions must feel like psychological torture for him. Especially coming from someone he once dismissed, underestimated, or tried to manipulate. But the wildest part of this entire moment is that we are only at the beginning. More evidence is piling up. More people are speaking out. More documents are circulating. More witnesses are considering coming forward. And the global conversation keeps expanding. This is not the downfall of a year, it's the downfall of a decade. A long, slow public unmasking of a man who believed he was immune to consequences. And now he's sitting in a prison cell sending funeral flowers because that's all he has left. Empty gestures from a collapsing throne. Part 3 opens in a way that feels almost unreal, like the audience is watching a man who finally realizes his kingdom is burning down from every direction, but he's still trying to pretend he's in control. The documentary cuts back to that final stretch of hotel footage, 6 days before the arrest, where Diddy is pacing around the room, ranting at Justin Combs, ranting at his team, mumbling about loyalty, betrayal, lawsuits, fake friends, the internet turning on him, the industry abandoning him, and how everyone he helped is now turning him into a villain. It's uncomfortable. His voice cracks in certain moments, and his body language looks like a mix of denial and fear, anger and desperation. He keeps repeating that people are lying on him, people are ungrateful, people don't remember the good things he's done. He leans over the granite counter in that penthouse suite like he's struggling to hold himself up, like the gravity of what's coming is finally hitting him in a way he can't ignore anymore. The documentary then cuts to interviews with former insiders, people who knew him during the height of Bad Boy, during the shiny suit era, during the 2000s club dominance, during the Revolt TV years, who say that Diddy always believed two things. Number 1, that he was untouchable, and number 2, that his empire would survive anything. But in these final days, they say that belief was crumbling right in front of his eyes. One of the producers of the documentary says you can tell by the footage that Diddy had become obsessed with trying to control the narrative, even as the narrative was slipping out of his hands. He was calling people non-stop, demanding loyalty, asking why everyone was silent, why celebrities weren't defending him, why the press was twisting the story. But the more he tried to fight it, the faster everything spiraled. The film then revisits Don Richards' lawsuit, the one he ranted about in part 2. Industry experts explain why that lawsuit hit him differently. It wasn't just the allegations, it was the timing, the details, and the fact that someone who had worked closely with him on music, branding, and creative projects was now stepping forward with claims that painted an even darker picture of what had allegedly been happening behind closed doors. One commentator says that Don's lawsuit rattled him psychologically because it challenged his self-constructed image of being a mentor, a protector, a gatekeeper of opportunities. With Cassie, the internet already had opinions. With the dancers, the bloggers already had theories. But when Don stepped in, it broke the idea that the people working closest to him viewed him as some misunderstood genius. Instead, it suggested that even his inner circle had cracks big enough to reveal the entire system. The documentary then cuts back to Diddy in that hotel suite, still pacing, still ranting. He brings up people he's helped get features, awards, housing, music deals. He keeps repeating that he was good to them. The irony is that the audience can see he's not even trying to defend the claims directly. He's defending his ego, his legacy, his myth. It's like watching a man argue with himself, with ghosts, with memories. The producers overlay this footage with ominous indoor room tone, the sound of distant city traffic, clips of TMZ headlines, and blurred-out legal documents to create this heavy sense of impending collapse. You can hear Justin in the background trying to calm him down, but Diddy doesn't calm, he spirals. He claps his hands, slams his fist onto the counter, then tries to joke, then tries to deflect, then tries to get angry again. It's emotional whiplash. Then the documentary explains the federal timeline. They show how, over that 6-day period, investigators had already pieced together surveillance, witness statements, travel records, social media activity, and internal reports. Legal analysts say that when the feds move, they don't move on rumor. They move on evidence they believe will hold in court. So while Diddy was pacing around that hotel room trying to rewrite history, the federal government had already decided that history needed to be examined under a microscope. The juxtaposition makes the footage even harder to watch. It's not a man preparing to defend himself. It's a man who still thinks there's a chance this will all blow over, even when the walls are already closing in. The documentary then shifts into how the internet played a massive role in accelerating Diddy's downfall. Analysts show timelines of how allegations went viral within minutes, how TikTok creators broke down every interview, every gesture, every past controversy, how Twitter and Instagram were flooded with theories, comparisons, memes, old clips resurfacing, and people expressing shock that no one believed the victims earlier. They show YouTubers reacting to the lawsuit details, podcasts calling out industry hypocrisy, and former associates implying that everyone knew something was off back then. It became a storm that Diddy couldn't outrun, and the documentary emphasizes this heavily. One expert even says, in 2005, Diddy could have survived this. In 2010, maybe. But in 2024? Social media does not let people hide. The film then returns to emotional testimony from people who say they witnessed events over the years. Assistants, security, team members. They describe a culture of fear, of loyalty being demanded, of consequences for speaking out, of people feeling like they couldn't leave certain situations or opportunities without risking their careers. One woman describes the younger era of the industry, where artists were desperate for a breakthrough, where saying no meant losing your one chance at fame. She says, people think the industry is glamorous, but early career vulnerability is the darkest currency. That's what makes these stories horrifying. Her voice cracks when she says it. The documentary lingers on her expression for several seconds. The pacing then slows dramatically as the producers show the last night before the raid. They use security-style footage, blurred hotel hallways, timestamps, and voiceovers from legal experts to explain how a federal operation is prepared. The audience can feel the tension. The film shows Diddy sitting alone near the balcony window, scrolling through his phone, looking exhausted, defeated, overwhelmed. A former friend says, that was the moment he knew there was no more running from it. The shot is eerie. He's just sitting there staring out at the city lights while the world outside is preparing to change his life forever. Then the documentary covers the early morning of the federal search, describing the procedure, the team formation, the reason behind choosing that specific time, and what the agencies were reportedly looking for. They make it clear this was not a random inspection. It was a strategic operation, and they explain why those operations are typically carried out when a subject is likely to be compliant, disoriented, and unable to obstruct evidence. The narrator calls it the moment when illusions die. The documentary then cuts to celebrity reactions. Some remained silent. Some deleted old photos. Some distanced themselves subtly. Others made cryptic posts implying that the truth always comes out. It was the first time in Diddy's career where he seemed to have no allies stepping forward to publicly defend him. Not artists, not executives, not friends, not collaborators. And the documentary highlights the significance of this silence because for a man who built his brand on relationships, alliances, and public loyalty, total silence is louder than any accusation. Then comes the emotional ending. More alleged victims speak, some with blurred faces, some with altered voices. They tell stories of healing, of reclaiming their sense of self, of finally being seen and believed. One woman says she spent years being dismissed, gaslit, ignored, mocked online, and told she was doing it for attention. She says, "It wasn't attention I wanted. It was acknowledgement." She tears up, and the documentary lets the silence linger around her words. The film then returns to the final clip of Diddy from that hotel room, his last recorded rant before the arrest. His voice is hoarse. He says, "I was good to these people." But this time the documentary plays it without music, without commentary, without edits. Just his voice echoing in a nearly silent room. The producers zoom in slowly, showing the exhaustion in his face. Viewers can tell he no longer believes what he's saying. It's like a man confronting the reality that he might spend the rest of his life being known not for the hits he produced, not for the artists he launched, not for the fashion or the dancing or the awards shows, but for the allegations, the lawsuits that kept coming one after another, and the empire that finally cracked. The documentary ends with a narrator saying that this story is far from over, that more people may come forward, more evidence may surface, more legal battles are on the horizon. They emphasize that accountability is not just about one man, but about an entire industry that allowed fame to overshadow humanity. They play a montage of city lights, old awards, newspaper clippings, social media posts, and finally a slow zoom out of the hotel where Diddy spent those last 6 days unraveling. And the moment the screen fades to black, the audience is left with a chilling message. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a reckoning is not when the truth comes out, but when the person running from it finally stops.